Over the past 10 years, my team and I have helped over 3,000 individuals fix wrist pain from repetitive strain injuries that didn't involve bracing, resting, medications, injections, and most importantly, surgery. Many of our patients have tried different ways to fix their pain, and were often confused why the recommendations from their doctors were not working. This video will help you understand everything you need to know and how you can get back to using your hands again with less pain. The first part of this video goes over why these injuries occur. Our lifestyle has a massive impact on our body, and the health bar framework is a great way to understand RSI. Sitting is the new smoking. You've probably heard this and seen this many times in the past decade. But is this really true? And what if I told you it isn't, but it's actually time that's a real problem? Not time itself, but time spent sitting. With enough time, it can be the reason why you have wrist pain. What? I'm a physical therapist who has specialized in treating wrist and hand injuries for the past decade. From programmers, software engineers, and other desk workers to even professional gamers and more. I've been featured on ESPN, Washington Post, published research, publishing a textbook right now, and have helped over 2,500 plus individuals fix their wrist pain. Let's first understand a bit more about what sitting can do to your body. We'll look at the position itself, then layer on the necessary context of posture, ergonomics, time spent sitting, overall lifestyle, and other factors. So, sitting on its own is not an inherently harmful position. It's a position where we are maintaining our trunk in a certain position for an extended period of time. This doesn't expend much energy, often less than 1.5 metabolic equivalents or METs, which is a measurement of energy expenditure. To put this into context, walking is around 5 METs, running 9.8 METs. So our body doesn't have to work very hard to be in this sitting position. And in most cases, we're sitting when we're programming, working, typing, gaming, and you can be in the posterior pelvically tilted position or anterior pelvic tilt. It doesn't matter. They are not inherently harmful positions by themselves. It's only when you layer on the amount of time spent in your lifestyle, your other activities with higher METs, that those postures can become a problem. Now, our body is highly adaptable. If we spend a lot of time on our feet, running, moving, etc., our bodies will adapt to that. And all of the systems of our body will respond to that, but most notably, our cardiovascular and musculoskeletal system. And so really think about this. What do you think happens if we spend 6 to 8 hours a day sitting, less than 1.5 METs, 5 days a week? And maybe a few more overall hours if you count some post-work relaxation or additional PC time, which is about 50 to 60% of our waking time spent in that static posture. Will our bodies get stronger, more resilient to external stress? Will our muscles and tendons have more endurance? Able to handle longer hours without irritating tissues? No, obviously not. It will not get stronger and can lead to deconditioning unless we do something about it. And when we're in our late teens to early 20s, youth is on our side. The deconditioning is not as drastic. For those who are familiar with our health bar framework, the sedentary lifestyle causes our max HP to reduce over time. And the goal is to always build up our max HP with specific exercises that target the muscles we're repeatedly using. And we actually created an app that can help you figure out what those exercises are based on where you're feeling your pain and your level of conditioning. And if you're interested, please grab it below. But to put this simply, our ability to handle a certain amount of physical stress on our bodies will reduce over time. And when we're younger, it might mean 1 to 2 HP per month, but as we get older and our physiology slows down, it may be as much as 10 to 15 HP a month. Again, assuming we're doing absolutely nothing. And over the past 10 years, I've actually noticed a clear trend in the physical health of many of the individuals that we've worked with. Here's some examples. And it shows that individuals are developing RSI issues earlier in life. Why? Because of how prevalent technology is in our society today and how much it has promoted a sedentary lifestyle. And actually, a study in 2022 looked at this by analyzing the lifestyle and sedentary behavior of 1,011 adolescents in Brazil. And they found that 52% of these individuals spent between 3 to 7.5 hours a day in front of a screen. And not only that, an additional 21.5% spent more than the 7.5 hours in front of a screen daily. That means this is a combined 73.5% of people having moderate to high levels of sedentary behavior. But what was more concerning was the fact that the study found that individuals with moderate sedentary behavior were 2.5 to 2.7 times more likely to have musculoskeletal symptoms when compared to those with low sedentary behavior. When you move less, you have more risk of developing injuries. And this is one of the many studies that have shown that sedentary behavior or inactivity can increase the risk of developing all types of MSK conditions: neck, low back, shoulder, wrists. And it's been shown over and over again, and what some of the best evidence shows is that the more time we spend sitting or not moving, the higher the risk of developing issues or problems. Again, when we don't move, our bodies get weaker and we have more risk of injury. And depending on your posture, what you're doing while you're sitting, and the other activities you perform throughout the day, the pain region, or where you feel it, will vary. And for most individuals who are programmers or desk workers, this means wrist and hand injuries, neck issues, low back pain, sometimes some shoulder issues. But the type of problem we end up dealing with can actually be influenced by two types of stress. The first type is what happens when a tissue or structure puts stress on another. This is called a compression stress and is often related to our posture or ergonomics. And a common example of compression stress is thoracic outlet syndrome, in which nerves can be compressed as they travel through certain sites around the neck and shoulder. And this is often the result of poor posture over extended periods of time, which can increase tightness and stiffness of the muscles, and that reduces the space for the nerves to travel along the shoulders and neck. Other examples include elbow and hand contact on the desk, leading to ulnar nerve irritation. The second type of stress is tension-related stress. This means too much pulling on a certain tissue. Tension stress is a more common problem because it involves muscles and tendons repeatedly being stressed until they become irritated. And most of the time, it involves the tendons. There's also shearing stress, but those typically represent a smaller distribution of injuries we see from inactivity for programmers and engineers. By understanding the stress, we can learn how to better treat these issues. And I'll show you how you can better approach each of these problems right now. If you have compressive stress, you want to get out of that position that leads to the tissue becoming compromised. But you also have to zoom out further to understand why the tissue is getting compressed in the first place. The posture is one thing, but the surrounding muscles may need some conditioning to reduce the risk of developing stiffness. Of course, moving more helps to avoid mobility problems in the first place. And this is the general approach taken when we look to resolve issues like TOS or thoracic outlet syndrome. We identify the posture leading to compression. We treat the underlying areas of tightness and weakness leading to that nerve compression, and we promote more movement and improved postural awareness to reduce the likelihood of that problem returning. If you have tension-based stress, it's a matter of improving how much your tissues can handle, improving that health bar or muscular endurance. And it involves reducing the amount of tension on the tissue while we're building up that capacity. This could be improving your posture and ergonomics, limiting the amount of time you're performing your activity, like typing or working or using that actual hand, and again, moving more. Unfortunately, our healthcare system is not great at taking care of our HP bars. It often fails to get us to the right provider and takes a more passive approach when a more active one is typically needed. Let me let you in on a little secret, what I call the healthcare system trap. Right now, thousands of individuals with wrist and hand pain are being ping-ponged around the healthcare system for months, trying to find some actual help and treatment so they can get back to typing, working, and using their hands without pain. And they are convinced by the healthcare system that resting, medication, injections, bracing, ergonomic changes, or even surgery will be the solution to get long-term relief. Welcome to the broken healthcare system. Resting, bracing, and medication is fool's gold. So what is the real way to fix wrist pain? It's actually so simple. It's about having enough HP, or tissue endurance, to handle the physical stress of repeated typing. Path A is resting for a few weeks for the pain to go away. Then you try typing and using your hands again, only to feel worse in a shorter amount of time. Path B You spend time building up your HP for 6 to 8 weeks and see your ability to use your hands gradually return, week by week. I watched countless people take both paths, and path B wins every single time. One of the most common reasons why we develop pain is too much, too quick, and too soon. And the underlying theme is lots of typing and use of the wrist and hand without breaks that exceed the typical amount you perform on a regular basis. Now, here are some hypothetical examples that represent some of the patients that we've seen before. Individual number 1. Let's say on average, an engineer actively utilizes their hand for 4 to 5 hours during a workday. During this time, the intensity of typing will vary depending on the task at hand. And we'll say that 4 to 5 hours is equivalent to around 700 stress units. This is a made-up unit, but we'll say it represents stress on your tissues. Again, I'm not a software engineer myself, but I'm sure during certain tasks of the day, you may be typing more actions per minute than when you're responding to a message on Slack. This individual was fortunate in that his schedule only required him to increase the amount of hours he needed to type gradually, with some 8 to 9 hour days, but always with a lower amount of typing on the second day. This engineer proactively looked for ways to reduce the amount of typing after a longer day to avoid excessive stress building up onto his wrist and hand. And this gradual increase in load avoids irritating this individual's tissue and reduces the risk of developing injuries. But not everyone is so lucky in being able to gradually increase their physical load. This is the case of individual 2. This individual also has an average of 45 hours a week. However, his projects were poorly managed, which required him needing to spend 3 days in a row working between 9 to 11 hours a day. And this is actually really commonly reported from our patients. Due to the schedule and what was required from his job, he was unable to rest or deload throughout this work sprint. This significant increase in typing and work volume led to him irritating his wrist and hand and feeling pain. His schedule and the work sprints that are so common in the software engineering profession led to the development of an injury. Now, what is actually affected when we have wrist pain? Is it carpal tunnel syndrome? The key signs, especially early, is pain in the hand, numbness and tingling specific to this region of the hand. And this is because for carpal tunnel syndrome, it involves a nerve at the carpal tunnel becoming irritated. And that causes those tingling and numbness patterns along the first 3 fingers. Now, ask yourself what you're feeling. Do you feel tingling? Do you feel numbness? Or is your pain a bit more localized at your wrist? Maybe the thumbs, maybe the fingers, maybe the back side of the hand, maybe the thumb side of the wrist. If you aren't feeling numbness or tingling or pain in this specific pattern, it's very, very unlikely you have carpal tunnel syndrome. But here's the kicker. In the past decade, we've seen over 3,000 cases of wrist and hand injuries, and a majority of them have come to us with doctors who have diagnosed them with carpal tunnel syndrome, when the top 3 pain patterns were the palm side of the wrist, the top side of the hand, and the pinky side of the wrist. And guess what? Out of those 3,000 cases, only one of them presented with mild carpal tunnel syndrome symptoms after our comprehensive assessment. And instead, most of them involved the tendons. And so how is this possible? Most of the people that came to us felt pain because of typing, clicking, gaming, guitar, piano. And I want to ask you, what's more likely with small repetitive actions? Is it A, the nerve that travels in the tunnel becomes irritated from the repeated use of muscles and tendons? Somehow the nerve gets compressed. Or B, we have tendons and muscles that are responsible for those repetitive movements that get irritated. Yeah, it's B. These tendons need to have enough endurance or capacity to handle the repeated stress. Now, I'm not saying that eventually, if the tendons are irritated enough, they can swell and reduce the space at the carpal tunnel to irritate the median nerve. But in most cases, that's not happening in the first year, second year, third year, sometimes even the fourth year. With a better understanding of why these injuries occur, we can explore more of the physiology and more about how tendons become irritated and adapt. Let's break down some of the science and physiology around this. With enough repetitive activity of the wrist and hand, it can lead to some irritation of the tendons and muscles at our wrist and hand. Exercise is the solution to improve your capacity, But that's not all you have to work on to get back to doing what you love. Tendons are ropes of collagen fibers that are bundled in nature. Think of it like a rope with a bunch of different fibers that make up the larger rope. And within each of these bundles, there's little tendon cells, which are sensitive to the pulling of the fibers. The tendon cells are these little round dots. And these images over here show what a healthy tendon looks like. The fibers are nicely aligned, they're not broken up, while these images show what the tendon looks like when it's irritated or there's too much stress. Water fills up the spaces, the fibers become more weak, they become more disorganized. Think of it again like a rope that has strong fibers intertwined nicely and are well packed. When the rope is pulled too much, sometimes it can fray, space opens up, and it can't handle the stress of pulling as well. This is exactly what happens to our tendons, and this is what has been shown based on the research looking into tendon pathology. So what does exercise do for us? Isn't it also considered stress or pulling? The right amount of exercise or load allows the rope to become stronger, and there are real changes in the tendon that occur as a result of this. And additionally, the muscle itself, when you do exercises, can begin to handle more stress. So it can lead to more even pulling on that tendon rather than uneven pulling if some fibers are fatigued. When we provide healthy load to the tendons, here's what actually happens. The casing and surrounding of the tendon better manages the fluid within to help better handle stress, but also glide alongside each other more effectively. There are cross-links that develop that also increase the amount of stress that can be tolerated. But even more unique is that the fibers themselves become stronger, and that's controlled by the type of collagen within that fiber. More of the stronger collagen type, type 1, makes up the fiber rather than the weaker ones, type 3 and type 4. So thinking again of that rope, a fluid and casing is wrapped around the rope to keep the fibers in optimal shape and allow them to slide well against each other. Then the rope has steel fibers instead of manila or cotton, that type 1 versus type 3, type 4. This makes for an insanely strong rope or tendon that can handle more stress. But now that you know the science, you're probably wondering what the right exercises are for your problem. When we have pain at different regions of our wrist and hand, it's always associated with a specific muscle and tendon, responsible for certain movements of our hands. When we lift our fingers up, it involves the extensors. Pressing the thumb button a lot to swap between keyboard layers, the thumb. A lot of movement of the mouse side to side, your ulnar and radial deviators. Pressing our keys or mouse, our finger flexors. And fortunately, you've stumbled upon this video and channel. We have free routines, exercises, and guides that can help you determine what exercise will work for what region of pain and which tendon is involved. You can check those out in the description below. And now it's about doing it. So get moving. Here are the 4 steps you can actually take to implement the 1 HP formula and how you can use different types of exercises to get back to function. The 1 HP formula: building endurance plus schedule management plus belief changes equals healthy hands. And when you actually address underlying problems, you will finally make the progress you've been looking for. And when you do that, you ultimately learn more about how your body works, so you can prevent this from ever happening again. Austin worked with me to come up with a plan and to follow that formula. The main focus was to build up the endurance and strength of his wrists and hands. And for Austin, it was his wrist and finger flexors and extensors. These are the muscles responsible for helping you type and lift your fingers off the keyboard. We started with sets of 15 to 18, and as he continued to stick with the program, he was able to progress into 25 to 30 reps per set. And because Austin's pain was moderately severe with pain after typing for 1 minute, we started with the exercises only 1 time a day, at night before bed. And this is how we helped him build up his endurance, but it was also important to manage his schedule. We set a max limit for how much he would gain for the first week, then gradually increase that based on how he was feeling. And the reason why Austin continued to have pain over the 4 years was that he didn't realize how pushing through the pain and continuing to load his wrists and hands was causing his HP bar to reduce in size more quickly. His HP bar got smaller with each year he followed the healthcare system's recommendations. And that's why we worked closely to manage his schedule. But 4 years of doctor's visits and dealing with the pain can lead to certain beliefs. One of the most important things I helped him with was learning more about these signs of pain and how his lifestyle was contributing to his limited progress. The healthcare system trains us to believe that pain measures what is going on with the tissues, and that when pain is gone, the tissues healed. Pain and our bodies are way more complicated than that. Pain is never a reflection of the state of our tissues, but is rather always about protection. Pain is an experience that's influenced by our beliefs, thoughts, understanding of the problem, and of course, the physiology itself. And science and research has shown us this over and over in the past decade. And the more we understand this, the more we can make better decisions about what to do, even though we have pain. And if you're interested in the science, you can learn more with an article I've written below. Throughout his journey, Austin felt pain during his exercises and while he was working. But with his improved understanding of pain, he knew it was not something that was harmful and was rather something he could work around. I taught him what pain was normal and what situations actually required a change in behavior or how to perform the exercises. And I really want to shout out Austin for being so willing to commit to the lifestyle changes, doing his exercises and learning more about his body. And that's really often the hardest part. 4 weeks later, Austin was now able to type for 4 to 6 hours with only 1 out of 10 pain in the majority of his pain regions, 2 out of 10 pain at the end of the day. His knuckles were still bothersome, but he could go up to 4 hours of typing before it got to 3 to 4 out of 10. Driving also improved with only 2 out of 10 pain after 20 minutes, going away a lot more quickly than lasting the rest of the day. He was also able to handle gaming for 4 hours with 2 out of 10 pain. During this time, we worked together to make small changes in his program, increasing some reps while also ensuring he was performing them correctly to load the muscles and tendons that we're trying to improve. And as a membership client, we met on a weekly basis. We spoke frequently through DM and through calls to ensure that we could address any concerns that he had. And through this, we were able to progress and modify anything based on how he felt or what he was experiencing. On top of this, I was also able to give him really specific schedule recommendations so he could gradually increase his playtime. Here's an example using WoW, the game that he played, for a 1 week span. Now, his progress after 4 weeks was pretty good, but here's what he had to say after 8 weeks.
I'm able now, typically 90% of the time, I'm playing games without pain. And I say 90 because sometimes it'll come back and be a little irritated, but if I do some of the stretches and do a workout that was given to me, it typically goes away pretty quickly. So I can play games for hours now, and it feels pretty good to be back there.
No pain all day at work for all regions, no pain with driving, able to play 5 hours a day, wow, with breaks and stretching integrated. He continued to maintain his exercise program, and he improved his understanding of what was considered normal soreness or pain. And at this point, he was able to do whatever he wanted with his wrists and hands without having to worry about damaging them, because he knew that it's normal to feel some discomfort if you do something for an extended period of time that exceeded the capacity of your tissues. And this actually happened in the last few weeks when we were working together, when he tried playing a game that utilized his controller more, which led to more thumb soreness. And so what's important here is that this is normal, right? And not thinking that your pain has returned. This was a really crucial part for me to help him understand. Our bodies are always adapting to the stress that's being applied to it, and it can only handle the stress that it's prepared to handle. So having a maintenance routine or building a general wrist endurance routine is always going to be necessary if you spend a lot of time at the computer and use your wrists and hands. Just like you have to physically prepare yourself for a marathon, you need to physically prepare yourself for any activity based on what muscles and tendons you're using frequently. And so Austin was comfortable handling things on his own at week 8, and I'm sure he's still continuing to build his endurance on his forearms as we speak. But remember, it takes time to build up that endurance. And as a software engineer, here's what you need to recognize. Your profession requires you to have a less physically active lifestyle. And if you maintain that lifestyle over many years without a focus on maintaining the conditioning of your wrists and hands, and generally your body, they can weaken over time. This means that if you don't adopt some basic habits, regular wrist and hand endurance training, taking breaks on a consistent basis for both your mental and physical health, going on a walk or performing stretches for the wrist and hand, optimizing your ergonomics to minimize stress during your actual work sessions, your risk for injury can gradually increase. And in most cases, the physical demand of most software engineering jobs will stay constant. And it's really easy for us to understand this concept when we think about being a professional athlete or a runner. These individuals have to train and prepare their bodies to tolerate the physical demands of their sport. Sitting and typing at the computer doesn't seem like much physically, but when you zoom out, you can see how it can potentially impact your body. With a sedentary lifestyle or 8 to 10 hours of sitting, at least half of our waking time is spent in front of a computer, and in many situations, we spend even more of those hours on the PC or a couch afterwards. So maybe 70 to 80% of our day is spent not moving, and that can have detrimental effects on our body. As an engineer, you also have high wrist and hand activity, and although the movements aren't strenuous in nature, software engineers often spend a large amount of time performing these small, repetitive movements of the wrist and hand, typing and mouse clicking. Think about the actions per minute over the span of time that you're typing. This can lead to tissue irritation if our muscles and tissues aren't ready to handle this type of repeated stress over time. And of course, this doesn't take into account the other potential factors that can affect our health, like sleep, nutrition, lack of light exposure. And I'm hoping the message is becoming more clear. It doesn't matter what activity you perform. Whether it be gaming, playing music, typing on the keyboard, drawing, you have to have the physiology to be able to handle the physical demands over the years you're participating in that activity. And now that this is clear, let's actually highlight 4 steps you can take to adopt these habits into your lifestyle. If you take the time to audit your schedule, it can become increasingly clear how you can apply a lot of cumulative stress on your wrist and hand. 4 hours of work without a break is very different than one 90-minute work cycle with a 30-minute break followed by another 90-30. Integrate more breaks after your deep working blocks, and you can use this time to either take a short walk or perform stretches to help with that stiffness that can often occur from repeated use. So step 1 is manage your schedule, which is helpful, but even more important is improving how much your body can handle repeated activity over time. Most people think about strength, but not muscular endurance, which is what we're trying to build. Endurance. These are different physical abilities our tissues have. So you should be regularly performing wrist and hand exercises, whether it be dumbbell curls or rice bucket exercises, to target the muscles that you're using when typing and clicking to build up your endurance. And you want to focus on higher overall repetitions with less weight. So 3 sets of 20 to 30. You want to start slow and work up. Less during work sprints and more during lower work periods. You're now more intentional about your schedule. You've incorporated breaks and reminders to move. But we also have to be considerate of your environment. Not where you're living, but how you're actually set up at your PC, your posture and ergonomics. This really isn't the scope of this video, but we do have a long playlist if you do want to check out more. Improving your posture and ergonomics can reduce the stress per unit time on the muscles and tendons. And in our experience, it actually doesn't play as large of a role as we think it does when it comes to preventing injuries. This is because our tissue capacity actually provides the largest buffer for injury. There are, of course, situations in which posture is a larger contributor, but in our experience, these are mainly associated with the shoulder, with a few at the elbow and very few at the wrist and hand. And lastly, now that we focus on things you can do during and around your work, you also have to recognize how the other parts of your body and physiology can impact your health. Sleep, nutrition, mental health, a consistent daily schedule, regular exercise can all complement those initial 3 steps to keep you healthy. And with this information, you can now keep your wrists healthy forever. And if you don't want to do this alone or figure out how and when to do these exercises, you can check out our app. It actually gives you a personalized program, the specific exercise for your pain, and not only in the palm region, but some of these other regions as well, and determines the right sets and reps based on your actual endurance. You're gonna actually have to do some self-tests. You can track your progress. It's gonna guide you on how you can improve things over time. But the best thing of all, you actually get access directly to us in a private text channel, so you can ask us anything about your entire progress or the exercise. One of the easiest ways to implement exercises is to use isometrics. It not only helps begin endurance adaptations, but can also help with pain. Is there a specific type of exercise that can reduce your wrist and hand pain instantly? Yes, there is. But it isn't a magic bullet that will help you get back to 100%. It can be, however, a great start for many to start their journey for recovery. Today, we're going to talk about isometric exercise. And as I said, it can be used to get some really quick relief for the pain you might have in your wrist and hand. If you're in your early stages of dealing with wrist pain, or you feel the pain is unbearable at times to the point it prevents you from using your wrist and hand, this type of exercise might help. I'm going to teach you the 4 things that you need to know about isometric exercise so you can use them effectively, but also realize what limitations they might have. Let's start with the science. A well-known researcher in the tendinopathy space, Ebony Rio, published a study in 2015 on 6 volleyball players. It's not a lot, I know, and it showed that performing isometric exercises for 5 sets, 45 seconds contraction at 70% of their maximal effort, with 2 minutes of rest in between, was able to lead to an immediate decrease in pain from 7 out of 10 to 0 out of 10. And the author suggested that it was likely due to changes in the brain to muscle signaling, cortical changes, along with some local tissue changes. Basically, the brain becomes better at sending signals to the muscles and tendons, along with the release of some chemicals locally that can reduce the pain. And a follow-up was then performed in 2017, which also showed a reduction in pain for individuals with knee tendinopathy, patellar tendinopathy. And what this tells us is that for a certain type of individual, isometric exercise can be helpful in reducing pain. And over the past decade, we actually created a modified protocol for the upper extremity, your wrist and hand, that led to similar results. And it's helped a lot of people in their early stages of recovery find some pain relief, but also help them use their wrists and hands more because they have less overall pain. And this protocol, what I'm calling the 1HP protocol, involves isometric exercises for the tendons at the wrist and hand for 3 sets, 45 seconds between 50 to 70% effort. It shouldn't cause any pain or increase in symptoms, and you rest about 30 seconds between the sets. And this led to a pain reduction that would last for around 45 minutes to even up to an hour, and sometimes even longer for certain cases that we've seen. And what's interesting is that the research has shown and supported something that we've experienced with our patients. It doesn't help everyone. Most interventions don't, since it requires nuance in considering individual circumstances. And this leads me to actually point number 2. Why didn't it help everyone? We experienced some cases where isometric protocol actually made things worse temporarily, and then others where isometrics also didn't do anything at all to reduce pain. There's an actual real reason for this, and it's because pain is complicated. When we actually layer on what we know now with pain science, it actually becomes a lot more clear why there's this distribution of 3 responses. 1, it helps to reduce the pain. In our experience, it helps more than 70% of people. Number 2, it doesn't do anything. That's around 20% of people. And 3, it can make your pain worse, which represents 10% of our cases. What we found was that for the individuals when pain was less mediated by the cognitive, emotional, and the contextual drivers of pain, so think your beliefs, your understanding of pain, your fears, your anxieties around your injury, when it's less associated with that and more around the actual body structures, your tendons, not having the actual capacity to support the amount of activity that you're performing, that's when it can actually be very helpful. And this actually represents most people. But in the other cases, when pain is a bit more complex, you have been dealing with the pain for a while, your nervous system becomes a bit more sensitized, you might have some fears, some harmful beliefs around the injury. This leads to the other 30% of our experience. And to my knowledge, there really isn't any study that has layered on this lens of pain science, and they've mainly focused on the body structures. So current studies have only really focused on the pathophysiology, basically what's going on with the tissues, your nervous system. And they've actually shown those 3 different responses in different regions of the body. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it makes it worse. That's what the studies and research says now. If that's the case, how do you make sure it can help you? Or how can you make sure you fall within that 70%? Let me tell you. The 3rd thing we need to know is how isometrics can realistically be used in recovery. And I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but here's our experience. If you are someone that has been dealing with the pain for less than 3 months, that means you haven't had many doctor's visits, which might have confused you as to what is going on, and the pain is only limiting you from when you use it for really extended periods of time. Think at the end of your workday as a programmer, desk worker, or when you game at the end of the day. If that describes you, then you likely fall into the 70% of people that it will help. So try it. It won't hurt you. And that's a great thing about this type of exercise. There's no way that a low-level contraction can lead to any lasting damage or problems for any RSI-related issues. So you can feel safe in trying it for any of these scenarios. But for those that have had more doctor's visits, have been dealing with it for longer, for some cycles of rest that likely led to your muscles and tissues getting weaker, there's just more of a chance that it won't help. And it's mainly influenced by what you believe is going on based on your healthcare visits, your current level of deconditioning, and of course, how you perform the exercise. What we've seen is that those who have been dealing with the problem for 4+ years are extremely confused about what is happening. All of the traditional interventions seem to have failed. Injections, surgery, medication, bracing. The isometrics sometimes don't work because of all of those cognitive emotional aspects that come along with 4+ years of limited progress. And so the practical advice is this. It really doesn't hurt to try isometric exercises. It's something that we tend to utilize earlier in the recovery process for most people we work with. Why? Because it's just a simple way to provide healthy load to muscle and tendons, and the amount of resistance can be controlled since it's mostly applied by your own hand. So regardless of what situation you fall into, try it. If it helps, great. If it doesn't, no worries. You can also try isotonic exercises and just be patient as you build up your tissue's capacity. And if you're in that 10% where it feels worse, then it really requires some reflection as to whether it was actually from the exercise, the activity you performed on the day, or how much you might have been focusing or obsessing about these symptoms. And I know it seems weird, but this can actually increase pain and keep things sensitive. This leads me to the fourth and final thing you need to know, which is how you perform it matters. Makes sense, right? The exercise you select typically determines what tissue you will be targeting. Resisting wrist extension, target the wrist and finger extensors. Resisting radial deviation, targeting radial deviators. Resisting ulnar deviation, ulnar deviators, and so on and so forth. And if you aren't sure what exercise you should be doing and want a clear plan that incorporates isometrics and other isotonic exercises that will help you resolve your wrist pain quickly, check out our troubleshooter below. You'll receive a personalized plan based on your region of pain, specific guidelines for how many and when to do the exercises, and most importantly, you get access directly to us to ensure you're making progress with your plan. So after you've found the right isometric exercise for the region you're feeling your pain in, then it's important to perform the exercise with the 1HP protocol. And here it is again with a bit more depth and guidance. First step, how bad is your pain at rest? 0 to 10. Remember this since you'll check in afterwards. Then you want to perform 3 sets, 45 seconds, 30 seconds of rest in between. Find the amount of resistance where you do not feel an increase in symptoms or pain, or you don't feel like it's causing your forearms to completely fatigue within the 45 seconds. And that's not an easy thing to find, but it takes some trial and error to find the right resistance. And ideally, you do want to get to that 70% effort. But for some of you, it could just be 30%. Others, it might be 50%. And this is because everyone's conditioning is different. So once you're able to narrow down that resistance, then you can follow the guidelines above. After you try it, you can see how you respond after finishing the protocol. How bad is the pain now? Did it go from a 4 to a 0? Nice, then you're in that 70%. Did it only go down 1 point? You're probably in that 20%. And focusing on the endurance will be your main approach. Or did it make the pain worse? Then you're probably pretty deconditioned and have been dealing with it for a while. And to be honest, you might need some more involved support to really find the right level of loading for your wrist and hand, also considering your daily activities. You want to work with a good physical therapist you can meet with more regularly so you can make load modifications appropriately. And remember, isometrics are just one component of a recovery program. It's typically that starting point for the cases we see that are really severe or irritable. And from there, it's important to build up your tissue's capacity with endurance-based exercises. And of course, targeting the right muscle group that's involved. After an initial period of implementing isometrics, you can move toward isotonics that allow you to move through a full range of motion. And here are the exercises you can consider for 2 of the most common pain regions we see. And now that you know what action these muscles are responsible for, this is why the exercises that challenge those movements can be helpful to build endurance of the muscle and tendon. Exercises have been shown in the research to be beneficial in the treatment of tendon problems. And this is also supported by our experience working with thousands of patients and a first principles understanding of tendon adaptation. These are the 2 recommended exercises you can perform for the wrist flexors. This is wrist flexion with a dumbbell. You can use other objects like a water bottle or household objects which can provide some resistance as you're performing this exercise. If the full range of motion is uncomfortable, you can try partial range of motion. This exercise targets the muscles we described earlier, and the focus is endurance. So select the weight in which you can perform between 3 sets of 15 to 20, and this should be around 2 to 5% of your body weight. This is a more specific strengthening tool for the flexor muscles of the wrist and fingers called the Vary Grip. What's great about this tool is that you can actually adjust the resistance per finger, and this one has a resistance between 3 to 5 pounds. Typically, the pinky and ring finger are more weak, so you can reduce the difficulty of those with this tool. Or you can use the other hand to support the fingers as they move down and return to the start position without help. Similarly, we want to focus on endurance, so aim for 3 sets of 15 to 20 to be done daily. These are the 2 recommended exercises for the wrist and finger extensors. This is wrist extension with the dumbbell. Similarly, perform partial range if the full range tends to feel uncomfortable. Typically, clients of ours report discomfort at the bottom of the range as this pulls on the extensors of the forearm and hand. This exercise targets the extensor muscle group described, and again, the focus is endurance. So select a weight in which you can perform 3 sets of 15 to 20. Normally, that's between 2 to 5% of your body weight. And you're going to be doing this for at least 6 days a week. These are called rubber band extensions and are one of the best exercises to provide high tension or load onto the extensor muscle group. Rubber bands are the best tool as you can adjust the resistance and difficulty easily with the addition or removal of the bands. The bands that are offered online are typically too tough for most to perform the exercise well. Place the band at the fingertips and with the fingers slightly bent to maintain high tension on the tendons. You should perform 3 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions daily. And now, while we can focus on just the wrist and hand itself to help with those specific tendons, the upper body and arm doesn't move in isolation. Studies have shown that working on the shoulder musculature can help with grip strength and potentially endurance of the forearm muscles itself. And this is due to the connection of tissues along the entire arm. And this is why it can also be helpful to perform some exercises for the shoulder and mid-back. All of this can help you build a great recovery and eventually preventative program to keep your wrists healthy and strong. And remember, it takes time for tissues to adapt, so you have to be patient. Recovery is never linear, and it's important to be patient in the process of recovery. Tendons take much longer to adapt than muscles. We know nervous system adaptations can occur as quickly as 2 to 3 weeks, which means better signaling from the brain to the muscle, while the muscle tissue adaptations can take around 6 weeks. Tendon tissue at minimum takes around 8 weeks to fully remodel in this way. But again, it doesn't mean that you have to wait 8 weeks to see progress. It just means you have to be patient and you will see progress along the time. Most of the time we see progress in the 2 weeks because of the nervous system changes. We see even more around the 6-week mark as the tendon is beginning to change, but the muscle has improved endurance. And then things fully resolve when the tendons continue to adapt to higher endurance. This is of course the ideal scenario with no flare-ups. Life and recovery are obviously more complicated, and that is why it can sometimes extend recovery even further. On the flip side, there are cases in which tendons, because they aren't as irritated, can recover more quickly, and the muscle endurance plays the larger problem. But the bottom line is this: stay consistent and be patient as you navigate the ups and downs of the 2 months of adaptations. Everyone starts at a different level of conditioning, and so this will affect how long it will take for you to recover.
Today, I'm breaking down a fascinating study of a gamer who went from barely being able to use a controller to playing 8-hour sessions pain-free. But what makes this case so valuable for you is that we're going to show you the messy middle, the part most recovery stories leave out. If you've been dealing with RSI or any chronic pain, stick around, because I'm going to show you exactly why setbacks happen and the proven strategies to push through them. Let me introduce you to our patient, who I've gotten permission from and de-identified for their privacy. Our patient is a writer and a hardcore gamer who typically played between 4 to 12 hours every day. His symptoms first appeared in January of 2022. And they described their symptoms as kind of a tightness in the forearm and this weird twisting sensation that wouldn't go away. Fast forward to January 2024, and the pain had spread to the thenar eminence. That is the fleshy part at the base of your thumb right here. He described the feeling as congested, sticky, or gooey, kind of like the muscles were too short to move properly. By the time he came to us in July of 2024, he was experiencing severe pain in his right thumb pad, tightness in both of those forearms, which was worse on the right side. that persistent twisting feeling in his right arm, sharp and dull pain spreading throughout his hands and fingers, and new pain developing in his shoulders and biceps. After a thorough assessment, we built a comprehensive program with 5 key components. First, a targeted endurance program focused specifically on the thenar eminence and the forearm musculature. This included specialized thumb stretches, isometric exercises, and progressive endurance training. Second, and this might surprise you, we didn't tell him to stop gaming completely. Instead, we implemented a strategic load management program, helping him adjust gaming time and take effective breaks without quitting his passion. Third, we incorporated these nerve glide techniques to address potential nerve compression issues affecting both the radial and ulnar nerves. Fourth, we expanded treatment to include neck, shoulder, and postural exercises. Repetitive strain injuries are rarely just about the hands, it is a completely interconnected system. And finally, pain education. This might be actually the most important part of this entire process. We helped him understand the neurophysiology of pain and how the brain interprets persistent symptoms, which leads us to the most fascinating part of this case. This chart tracks our patient's disability scores over 6 months. Higher percentages mean more disability. Check this out. He started out at an average score of 41% in July and August. His gaming specific scores were at 100%, meaning complete disability while gaming. By September, he improved dramatically to about 18%, but then suddenly regressed back up to 28%, despite doing everything right. This is exactly where most people give up. They think, I'm doing everything right, but I'm getting worse. This must not be working. But look what happened when he pushed through. By January 2025, he reached just 1% disability. That is a life-changing improvement. So why does recovery look like this roller coaster instead of a nice smooth downward curve? There are 4 critical reasons that you need to understand. First, pain doesn't always match tissue damage. This is absolutely critical to understand here. In traditional medicine, we're taught that if something hurts, there must be damage. But modern pain science shows that's not always true. When our patient felt those congested or sticky sensations in his hands, his tissues weren't actually being damaged. What was happening was his brain was misinterpreting normal sensations as threatening. Think about it like this. If you touch a hot stove, pain is very helpful. It tells you to move your hand. But with RSI, your brain can get stuck in protective mode, creating pain even when there's no ongoing damage. It's like a car alarm that keeps going off even though nobody's trying to break in. Second, neurosensitivity and pain memory. Over time, our patient's brain had developed what we call pain memory associated with specific movements. His nervous system became hypersensitive to certain actions even after his tissues had healed. Pressing these specific buttons or moving the joystick in a specific way would trigger the pain response. That's why he could play some games pain-free, but others would cause immediate flare-ups. It's like his brain had created a shortcut. This movement equals danger, sound the alarm. Even after periods of improvement, certain games would trigger symptoms without causing any actual damage to the tissues. Third, the powerful role of fear and stress. This is where psychology and physiology intersect. Our patient admitted, and I'm going to quote him in full here because this is so important. Do you have any advice on how to deal with the fear of not getting better? I find it hard to shake. It's just been so long since I've been without it, and I've had so many false starts where I think I'm healing only to regress, and it's hard to fend off. This fear literally amplifies pain through what we call the fear avoidance model. When you're afraid of pain, your brain becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger signals. This heightened attention actually increases pain sensitivity. Imagine approaching your gaming setup thinking, this is gonna hurt me. Your muscles tense up, your breathing gets shallow, stress hormones flood your system, all before you've even touched the controller. Your body is preparing for pain, which makes you more likely to experience it. And fourth, lifestyle factors. His pain journal revealed fascinating patterns that many medical professionals miss. During periods of poor sleep or high stress, his symptoms worsened significantly, despite maintaining the exact same exercise routine. On a good day's sleep with low stress, he could game for 4 hours at pain levels about 1 to 2. But on poor sleep days with high stress, just 30 minutes of the exact same game would spike the pain levels to 5 out of 10. Same movements, same exercises, completely different outcomes. So if you're dealing with RSI right now, I want you to remember this. These fluctuations are normal. They don't mean treatment isn't working or that you're broken beyond repair. They're just part of how the nervous system heals. Some days will be better than others. It's the long-term trend that matters, not the day-to-day ups and downs. Now let's talk about the game changer in this recovery, objective tracking. Our patient kept a detailed pain journal tracking pain levels before, during, and after gaming, duration of gaming sessions, and games played. Here's the magic of tracking. In November, he consistently rated pain at 1 to 2 out of 10 and could only game for 1 to 3 hours. But by January, he had multiple consecutive days with zero pain, even after 8 hours of gaming. When he experienced a flare-up in February, we could point to this concrete evidence and show him his overall trend was positive. Gaming tolerance had increased from 1 to 2 hours to 6 to 8 hours. Pain-free days were increasing month by month. Recovery from flare-ups was happening faster. This objective evidence countered his feelings that any progress was just going to be fleeting. It's psychological armor against the natural tendency to magnify current pain, forget past improvements, and catastrophize minor setbacks. If you take nothing else from this video, start tracking your symptoms today. It is that important. Let's talk about what actually worked when setbacks happened. We developed 5 specific strategies that made all the difference. First, gradual load adjustment. Instead of stopping all activity, we scaled back gaming by just 2 hours, then built back up in 15-minute increments. Complete rest often makes RSI worse, not better. Second, this specific self-massage technique using a small rubber ball to address tension in the thenar area. Third, systematic symptom monitoring. The detailed tracking we just discussed wasn't just for motivation, it helped identify specific patterns and triggers. Fourth, addressing electrolyte imbalances. When the patient reported muscle twitching, simple interventions like proper hydration and electrolyte replacement often resolve the issue completely. And fifth, deeper pain education. We recommended resources like The Way Out to help manage fear and catastrophizing, which often amplify pain signals. These aren't just theoretical concepts. These are the exact strategies that helped our patient push through the plateaus and setbacks that stop most people from recovering. By February 2025, 7 months after starting treatment, our patient's results were remarkable. Disability scores improved from 41% to just 1%. Gaming tolerance increased from 1 to 2 hours to 5 to 8 hours plus, with minimal symptoms. He returned to his favorite high-intensity games with almost no limitations. But perhaps most importantly, he developed the confidence and knowledge to manage his own condition. When flare-ups happened, and they still occasionally did, he no longer panicked or feared he was back at square one. So what can you take from this case if you're dealing with an RSI? 6 critical lessons. Expect non-linear progress. Recovery will have ups and downs. That is normal, not a sign of failure. Track your symptoms. A detailed pain journal reveals patterns and provides objective evidence of improvement. Focus on functional gains. Don't just track pain. Celebrate being able to do more of what you love. Address the whole system. RSI is rarely just about the hands. Consider posture, ergonomics, stress, and sleep. Understand that pain does not equal damage, especially in chronic conditions. Pain signals can persist even when healing is occurring. Build knowledge to reduce fear. Understanding pain science dramatically reduces the fear that amplifies these symptoms. Chronic RSI recovery isn't just about finding the perfect stretch or the perfect ergonomic mouse. Though those things can be helpful, it's about a comprehensive approach that addresses the physical, neural, and psychological aspects of chronic pain. Even after years of symptoms, significant improvement is possible with the right approach. The journey won't be linear, but with proper guidance and persistence, lasting results are absolutely achievable.
Now, there are a lot of common questions that we get about wrist pain, and the first and most common one is about bracing. Here's why they do not provide long-term relief. If you have wrist pain, the chances are you've been told that you need a brace. But what if I told you that you actually don't need one and it can make your problem worse? I'm a physical therapist who has specialized in treating wrist and hand injuries for the past decade. From programmers, software engineers, and other desk workers to even professional gamers and more. I've been featured on ESPN, Washington Post, published research, publishing a textbook right now, and have helped over 2,500 plus individuals fix their wrist pain. And guess what? We were able to do it without resting, medication, surgery, and most importantly, without using a brace. Bracing and resting your wrists and hands, like many doctors recommend, will not help provide long-term relief for your wrist pain. Why? Because it does nothing to actually address the cause of your pain. Think about it like this. You have a gas detector at your house, and one night the alarm rings extremely loudly and wakes you up and you can't seem to figure out how to turn it off. So you just take out the battery or pull out the cables attached to the detector. You've solved the problem of the loud alarm, but you failed to address any potential gas leak or problem that caused the alarm to go off in the first place. This is what a brace does for your wrist pain. It's a solution that's targeted only towards the source, muscle, tendon, or nerve, but it does nothing to actually address the underlying problem. And the underlying problem being poor endurance of the muscles and tendons you're using most frequently for your wrist and hand. Most wrist pain from office work affects the tendons of the wrist and hand. And there are quite a few tendons and muscles surrounding the wrist and hand, each responsible for the movements that we perform when we're working, typing, clicking, or moving the mouse. And based on what actions or tasks we're performing on a regular basis, stress can build up on those muscles and tendons. So if we feel it on the palm side of the wrist and hand, it's likely affecting those tendons, and vice versa. Top side of the hand, the extensor sided tendons. And if you've been looking for a recovery plan that helps you determine the right exercises to perform based on where you're feeling it, whether it be at the palm side, the top side of the hand, the pinky side of the wrist, or any of these regions, we've created an app that provides you a personalized program based on your level of conditioning. You can grab it right below. Tendons and their cells have only so much they can handle, a limited capacity, like a cup that can hold only so much water. When the water is too much for the cup, it's gonna overflow. This is when your tissues or the tendons become irritated and you experience pain. And over many years of physical inactivity and a more sedentary lifestyle, our cup can get smaller, so won't able to hold as much water. But if we exercise regularly and focus on endurance, we can build up the size of our cup and hold gallons of water. What is really unfortunate is that the advice of using a brace is so entrenched in not only our healthcare systems, primarily with boomer doctors, but also with resources online. Google, Reddit, YouTube, these are all the older models of how we treat wrist and hand issues. We now know that when we rest our tendons, they actually become more weak. The muscle tendon strength drops, the tendon loses its structure, the kinetic chain deteriorates, and our signaling from our brain to our muscles reduce. So while immobilizing our wrist can be helpful to limit any stress whatsoever on the tendons, it's counterproductive, and is the reason why many times when we reintroduce our activity, desk work, typing, guitar, playing music, drawing, the pain will come back more quickly because we've done nothing to change our endurance. So to actually get some long-term relief, we have to identify what muscles and tendons are involved based on what activity we're doing. And then we can build up the endurance of those tissues. But at the same time, we are modifying, not completely resting from activity. We'll play less, type less, since we're gonna be focused on building tissue capacity. We don't want to expose our tendons and muscles to too much stress. And what's important to recognize is that it takes roughly 4 to 6 weeks for tissues to adapt, and over that time we can gradually increase what we are doing in response to how much endurance we have. And this is what will allow you to get back to programming, desk work, typing, clicking without any pain. What I'm not saying here is that the brace is completely useless, but that there are limited situations in which we can use it. In most cases, we recommend the use of a brace at night to avoid being placed in positions of too much wrist bend or wrist flexion. The brace can also be utilized when the pain or injury is a little bit more acute, so the first 1 to 3 days. But outside of that, we don't typically utilize it during the day or with activity. But remember, the main focus is to build endurance. You have to start by understanding what your current level of endurance is and build from there. Imaging is typically also ordered for cases associated with wrist pain, and the overemphasis and focus is often placed on the results. Do ultrasound and MRI results matter for your wrist and hand pain? Not really, but let me explain. Over the past 8 years, we've noticed a belief that imaging like MRI, X-ray, ultrasound, and even nerve conduction tests provide a clear diagnosis for repetitive strain injuries of the wrist and hand. This is likely associated with the way doctors may be describing imaging in their discussion with their patients. There's a big difference between the imaging will tell us what's going on, let's get some imaging to figure out what's the problem, I'll order an MRI and we'll get some answers, and we'll see what we find in the imaging, but know that we have to use that information on top of what we know about your injury, how the pain behaves, to determine the right diagnosis. It should always be approach number 2. But unfortunately, due to our healthcare system and how behind many primary care providers are in their recommendations, it's almost always number 1, or the first few options. And there are some real consequences with that. Imaging and ultrasound doesn't matter as much as we think, and I'm gonna prove it to you through this video. Let's first talk about what imaging is typically ordered for RSI issues at the wrist and hand. Most typically we hear X-rays, MRIs, and ultrasounds. Each imaging technique has their benefits in visualizing certain types of tissues, and in many cases we see overutilization of things like X-rays. X-rays are good for seeing fractures, dislocations, misalignments, and narrow joint spaces, but they can't show soft tissue problems. These are generally ordered since they are more affordable, but honestly, many healthcare providers overutilize them. Magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, is good for seeing muscles, ligaments, tendons, organs, and other soft tissues. A majority of our patients seem to have had MRIs ordered, with 60% of our patients this year who have been dealing with the problem for more than 3 months getting an MRI. And there are different techniques that can emphasize different tissues, from T1 to T2 to proton density imaging. And the contrast between the tissues and the presence of certain coloring, white for example, can indicate if there's water present, which can suggest some swelling and inflammation. And in this picture, it shows a complete Achilles tendon tear. Ultrasound is typically the most cost-effective option for soft tissue issues, especially if you're trying to visualize more superficial tissues, especially those in the wrist and hand, because there's less layers at the tissues here. Ultrasound also provides a greater detail compared to an MRI for more of the superficial structures. And similarly with ultrasound, the presence of excess fluid can be indicative of tendon pathology. The image below shows a left and right comparison of a tendon with swelling present and thickening of the tendon. If imaging is ordered, ultrasound should be the first option due to its accessibility. And generally, imaging is best utilized to rule out more serious conditions than rule in a tendon being the cause of the problem. Basically, they're not always necessary. And there are mountains of research over the past 2 decades that have shown that imaging, not only for the wrist and hand conditions, but issues at the shoulder, neck, back, and foot, do not provide enough information for a diagnosis. In this study done in 2016, 19 asymptomatic professional baseball pitchers went through a detailed clinical exam, and 3 MRIs of their dominant shoulders were taken before contract signing. And guess what? They found that 68%, or 13 out of the 19 baseball draft picks, showed tendinopathy. 32% had a partial tear, or 6 out of 9, of the supraspinatus tendon. 21% had AC joint osteoarthritis. And many other small lesions were found in the subjects. But here's the kicker. None of them had any pain. These results and studies have been repeated in 634 runners, 3,000 individuals for the lower back, and at least 20 other studies, including several systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which have shown that altered tissue states in imaging does not always correlate to pain. You can see all of the references on the screen or in the description, but the research is clear. What we know is that changes in the tendon tissue can be present with imaging, but by itself, it does not mean anything. Instead, only when you layer on the results of a comprehensive clinical exam, which takes into account all of the details of the patient history, activity, and behaviors, that you can really make a decision with imaging results. And in some cases, imaging can make things worse. There are many reasons why this can happen, but one of them being the altered behavior and beliefs about your pain and injury as a result of what you're hearing or understanding about your injury with the imaging results. So one study found that for work-related acute low back pain, MRI within the first month was associated with an 8-fold increase in the risk of surgery and more than a 5-fold increase in the subsequent medical costs when compared to control patients who did not have early MRI. And so what we believe about our pain and our experience maybe with healthcare providers, with what we find online around the injury, can influence what we believe, how we perceive our pain, and how sensitive our injuries might feel. If we believe we're unable to move because we have a herniated disc or disc degeneration, then we tend to move less. We perceive that our bodies are fragile, and that leads to real physiologic changes that are detrimental to back pain. If we believe we have to rest because our nerve is being compressed through carpal tunnel syndrome, then we'll avoid the activity that is actually beneficial to us. Imaging is not as useful as we think for orthopedic conditions. For other medical conditions, absolutely. But for musculoskeletal injuries, and more specifically those at the wrist and hand associated with tendons, they don't really offer much value and can be shown through all of the research that I already referenced. Abnormal imaging has been reported in various tendons in as many as 59% of asymptomatic individuals, so people that have no pain or issues with their function, which means that even if they found your tendon to be pathological, it provides no predictive or diagnostic value. And in many cases, when tendons are appropriately loaded through rehabilitation, there's often more healthy tissue in the tendons than there are pathological tissue. More healthy tissue when you perform the exercise appropriately for the tendon to allow it to positively adapt, which means the focus should not be trying to change the pathology within the tendon, but instead focus on the tolerance to demand or stress. All of the tendinopathy research has continued to support this, and this has been exactly what we have seen in all of our cases. What you should focus on is 1. Performing endurance-based protocols to improve the tendon tissue's capacity. 2. Minimize overstressing the tendons. And 3, make changes based on how you're responding to the exercises, so increased pain and stiffness, etc. And this again does not mean imaging is useless. It just needs to always be placed in the context of the overall clinical picture to help guide decisions. And what we've seen is that it is a better tool for ruling out problems than ruling in. It can better tell us if there's not a problem than confirming if there is one. So what can you take away from this? Don't worry about your imaging results. If you have a doctor's appointment, make sure there has been a thorough examination that has been performed. And what I mean by this is there should have been physical tests to assess your muscular endurance and capacity of specific muscles you're using based on whatever it is that you do. There should also be clear identification of the pain pattern and pain behavior with different activities. And of course, assessment of your lifestyle, daily movement patterns and behaviors, and even beliefs that could lead to increased stress on your hand. If your clinician wants imaging, make sure the diagnosis provided includes the context of the examination details that I just listed. If it is not taken into account, then you should find a better clinician. And most importantly, understand that for a majority of wrist and hand issues, the tendons are involved. The best approach with the evidence that we have and the current research on tendon recovery is to manage how much stress is being applied, that load, and to build up your tissue's capacity. Now you might also be wondering, what about medications, injections, and surgery? Aren't they the end solution? The bracing segment may have previewed the answer for you. Most doctors won't admit that medication, injections, and even surgery will not provide long-term relief for your wrist, hand, and elbow pain. For many of those we work with, wrist pain often comes back, even after trying medications, injections, and worst case, getting surgery. If you're watching this and have already been to the doctor for your wrist and hand problems, chances are you've been prescribed some medication to reduce the pain. This was likely prescribed along with rest or avoidance of your specific activity. Now here's the problem. These recommendations don't work. Medications, injections, and other interventions like surgery do not provide long-term relief. And in this video, I'm going to help you understand why. For those of you who might not know, Elliot and I have specialized in working with gamers, desk workers, and individuals who deal with repetitive strain injuries of the elbow, wrist, and hand for the past 8 years. We've spoken at medical conferences, written textbooks, published research, and have dedicated the past decade to try to address this huge gap in the healthcare system. We've helped many individuals who have come to us because medications and injections and surgery didn't work. It might have provided them temporary relief, but they still had their pain return. And now I'm not saying that these never work, but in the case of a majority of repetitive strain injuries, they fail to address the underlying problem. So let's talk about the concept of source versus cause. If someone has developed pain from repetitive strain at the wrist and hand, here are some of the most common sources of pain. 1, the tendon, 2, the nerve, 3, the muscle, and 4, joint. Treating the source of the pain means doing things that directly reduce tissue stress on the involved tissue. And this can involve pharmacological approaches like medication to target different parts of these tissues. For example, ibuprofen helps with the pain by reducing the production of chemicals which can signal pain, your prostaglandins. And if a tendon, nerve, or muscle or joint is involved, reducing the signaling around pain doesn't address the cause in any way. The medication is just used for pain. And I think many of us understand this, but tissues can be injured in many ways. Tendons are overloaded when the demand of the activity exceeds the capacity of what it can handle. And this is often what happens at the wrist and hand. For example, if you are an artist and you have a deadline to finish a project, so you end up drawing for 10 to 12 hours for several days in a row, your tendons are likely going to be irritated. Or if you haven't played basketball for a while and you go to play several games, your heels or your knee might be irritated from the jumping and running. For nerves, they're typically irritated from compression at a certain site along where they travel from the neck, shoulder, all the way down to the fingers. And whether it be local irritation from swelling of other tissues like tendons, or postural related irritation where a certain muscle might be causing some pressure on the nerve. And this could be falling asleep with your arms overhead leading to nerve entrapment, or cubital tunnel syndrome. If the muscles at the forearm are tight or stiff, it can entrap the ulnar nerve as it travels between the fibers of the muscle. There's also trauma related cases, and they're different because there's clear external damage that's applied to the nerve or tissues. Muscles are also irritated from overuse, similar to how tendons are irritated. We repeatedly utilize a certain muscle past what it can tolerate in terms of strength and endurance, then the fibers might be strained, develop micro tears, and in more aggressive cases, partial or full tears. But again, all very likely in the case of a repetitive strain that has low load, low velocity type movements. Joints are often irritated when the supporting tissues, your muscles and tendons, are not able to support the joint, leading to more stress within the joint. And this can occur at the knuckles, but a good example is if you have weakness of the muscles around the knee, it can sometimes lead to swelling within the joint if you participate in a lot of activity that requires jumping, especially so after an extended period of time with lower levels of physical activity. So the cause of the problem in each of these situations are the activity or the movement, or even the cumulative activities, repetitive strain, that lead to the tissue being irritated. The source of the pain is the actual tissue themselves. And of course, this is more nuanced, but we can dig into it another time. And you can think of this like an overheating car engine. You bring your car into a mechanic, a doctor, who uses a tool, their objective assessments, to identify the source of the problem. In an example, it might be the radiator. So to fix a problem, they let you know you have to replace the radiator. This is the mechanic treating the source of the problem. A good mechanic, or doctor in this case, will ask in more detail about things like your recent oil changes, your driving habits, things that contribute to the engine overheating and the radiator being impacted. This is the mechanic treating or exploring what the cause of the problem might be. And it's always important to identify the cause so you can ensure you get long-term relief or resolution. So doctors should always evaluate in depth what lifestyle, your physical conditioning, your previous loading history, and other factors that could have led to your tissue strain. And if they haven't taken the time to do so, then they've failed to identify or treat the cause of the problem. But let's get into the actual science into why medications and rest-based interventions don't work. Most doctors provide the medications to help alleviate pain and make recommendations that reduce physical stress of those tissues like resting or bracing. But what is the actual source of the pain? Here's the distribution of what we've seen in the past 5 years with an N equals 1,441, 1,200 of those cases being tendon, around 114 being nerve. The majority of the injuries that we have seen resulting from repetitive strain are associated with the tendon. Nerves are involved in around 7.92% of the cases, followed by the muscle in around 3%. And many, if not all, of the problems within the nerves also had the underlying tendon problem that led to local irritation of the nerves, cubital tunnel, for example, in the first place. So let's look at what happens with tendons when we use medication, injections, and surgery. And we'll also consider what happens in the short term and the long term. So for medication at rest, many physicians advise patients to avoid activity and take their medication. And as mentioned, the medication is for pain. The current research is still inconclusive in how non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication, or NSAIDs, impact the healing and structure of tendons. There's research that seems to support the idea that with early administering of NSAIDs, it can actually delay the healing process, but with delayed administration of NSAIDs, it can help with healing. This is again still up in the air based on the current literature, but the main issue is what happens with rest. When we unload a tendon or rest, it can lead to changes at the cellular level and the supporting matrix that reduces the integrity of the tendon. The tendon just gets weaker. The connection between the brain and the muscle gets impaired, the muscle tendon complex weakens, and the entire control of your extremity, your arm or leg, is also negatively affected. In the short term, sure, the pain will go down. That's the source of the pain being addressed. But what about the actual ability of your tendons and essentially your hands to handle stress, your function, what you want to do? That will get worse with rest. You won't lose too much in the short term, but with repeated cycles of medication and rest that always occur, when the patient goes back to see the doctor, the tissue can become really weak, to a point where you can barely type, press keys, use your hands without any irritation. A lot of the complaints that we have our patients tell us. And in this situation, one of the common interventions that's typically recommended after this conservative approach of rest and medication doesn't work is the use of injections. So let's dive into what happens with injections, and specifically corticosteroid injections. Based on all of the current literature up to this point, corticosteroid injections are now considered harmful as an intervention for tendon pathology. We'll have the research listed in the actual description, but there have been countless studies that have shown that local corticosteroid injections for tendinopathies are not effective after the first few weeks. And so that means you'll get temporary relief of pain, but there's an increase in risk of re-injury and tendon rupture because the corticosteroid injections can lead to the tendon degenerating further. It can inhibit tendon repair and delay healing. And so when physicians recommend an injection for a tendon problem, this is what you have to weigh out. You're gonna get 3 to 4 weeks of pain relief. Great. But you're gonna have an increased risk of re-injury, tendon rupture, and likely increased chronicity of the issue if you're not doing any exercises to address the capacity problem. This should really be an easy decision for any patient when presented with this information. And unfortunately, this is not the information that's presented from the physician. The only thing the injection is helpful for is temporary pain relief in the short term. And long term, it will likely delay your recovery process as a result of the detrimental effects on your tendon physiology. So what if after the corticosteroid injection still didn't work, which we expect? Then sometimes surgery will be recommended. Obviously, there's different types of surgeries that can be performed, all with different goals depending on the surgery, whether it be removal of tissue, cleaning up the tissue within a joint, anatomical location, or fixation of tissues in certain areas. You as a patient still have to realize the most important thing. Does removing a tissue or reconstructing a tendon change the fact that maybe your lifestyle, your schedule, your wrist conditioning led to the tissue getting to that state in the first place? And if we do remove tissue and fail to address those underlying issues, sometimes the rehabilitation will be a forcing function to improve those, which is why sometimes there is success. But in most cases, we're not really solving the problem with surgery, which is why performing exercises and addressing the underlying deficits within your lifestyle, posture, and modifying your activity is important. And guess what? Even if pathological tissue is found in tendons, the research has shown we do not need to aim our treatments at trying to change the structure or pathology of the tendon. Normalizing the tendon structure is not needed, since there's often more healthy tissue in a pathological tendon that we can target with loading and exercise. Quite literally, all of the evidence and research available on top of our experience treating patients over the past decade has shown us that to actually recover from any RSI, you have to perform exercises to build up the tissue's endurance and capacity. And on top of that, you might have to make the right modifications to your activity, not completely avoid it, to reduce the external stress while you're building up your tissue's ability to handle more stress over time. And that's it. It sounds simple, but it isn't always that way in practice. Unfortunately, our healthcare system doesn't always equip us with the right knowledge immediately or get us to the right provider, and it leads us to these cycles of rest and pain. And I'm hoping that after seeing this or watching this right now, you have a better understanding of why medications, injections, and surgery do not work for RSI of the wrist and hand, and you actually do have more control than you realize in what you can do about it.
Exercises can sometimes make your pain feel worse. And while it may cause you to feel that a load-based approach is not appropriate, there's an underlying reason for the pain, and stopping the exercise often prevents you from making progress.
I've already tried exercises before and they didn't help. The pain only got worse after doing exercises. The program they gave me was just exercises for the wrist and hand. Over the past 8 years, we've worked with thousands of individuals who have all told us this many times. They've attempted some form of exercise in the past and have written off the benefit of performing exercises for their wrist and hand pain. When we explored more about their previous history with exercises, we found 4 things. 1, they performed only 3 sets of 10 for a few exercises and focused on building strength. 2, stretches were the only exercises they performed. 3, they were only consistent for a few weeks. And 4, the pain increased after trying the exercises. Exercises are beneficial when they are applied in a specific way. They can be performed for strength, coordination, flexibility, agility, balance, speed, and of course, endurance. Endurance. For the patients that fell into situation number 1, a majority used an appropriate weight, which is between 3 to 5% of their body weight, but were only asked to perform 10 repetitions. This is not enough to facilitate endurance adaptations. 15 to 25 reps per set is recommended, and if you can tolerate it, performing the routine up to 2 times a day. Exercises themselves determine what muscles we target. However, the way you perform them allow you to achieve different physiologic benefits. You don't need strength at our wrist and hand for small repetitive activities. You need endurance. And so performing the higher overall repetitions allows you to achieve the tissue adaptations that will improve your tolerance to repeated stress over time. For those in situation number 2, the focus was just on flexibility. Muscles do tend to stiffen up in response to an injury as a protective mechanism to avoid continued tissue stress. And this is often why stretching can help in the short term. But again, it does not address the underlying problem. Instead, you need to build endurance. And you need to also improve coordination or brain to muscle signaling. Within our programs, we tend to utilize tendon neuroplastic training protocols, which utilize a metronome or external pacing and higher overall repetitions to achieve this outcome. And these protocols are based on the current tendinopathy research, but over the past 8 years, we've adapted them to injuries of the wrist and hand, since most research has been done on the lower extremity. With the TNT protocols, it's been shown to reduce pain because it can improve the signaling between the brain and the muscle tendon complex. And so this can address those who fall into situation number 4. I'll be explaining a lot further in detail why pain can sometimes increase in response to doing some exercises. But you have to realize with any exercise, it takes time for the tissues to adapt, which accounts for situation number 3. And the research shows that it can take up to 4 to 6 weeks for changes to occur. And this doesn't mean that progress won't be noticeable, as nervous system changes typically occur within the first 2 weeks. So again, exercise selection helps you determine what muscles we target. But how you do the exercises within the context of your lifestyle allows you to make progress with your pain. So the sets, reps, the volume, the frequency, the cadence at which you're performing these exercises will allow you to achieve specific results depending on how you modify those variables. As I mentioned, it is normal to feel an increase in pain temporarily with the exercises. Everyone has their own unique case of wrist pain. Their individual lifestyle, physical conditioning, work and activity demands, environment, beliefs can all lead to a completely different profile and presentation of pain. And for the cases we've seen with an initial increase in pain, it's usually due to the following: extended amount of rest, bracing, or repeated interventions in which the gamer or individual limited the amount of stress on the muscles of the wrist and hand. That led to overall deconditioning and weakness of those same muscles and tendons. And that often was repeated in a cycle due to recommendations from doctors. So they reduced the pain, then the pain returned often worse than before, then they rested again with some maybe medication and some other passive intervention, again causing their muscles to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And all of those things do nothing to address that underlying cause of endurance or capacity of these tissues to handle repeated stress. And to provide a reference point, most individuals are able to do around 10% of what is considered normal of their muscular endurance. So basically the ability to do between 40 to 60 repetitions of a movement, challenging that muscle group at around that 3 to 5% body weight. And that's extremely weak. And that's a reason why they get pain from just typing and low level activities. And it also means it will take some time for them to get back to 100%. But not only that, the exposure to some exercise can cause the muscle to feel extremely fatigued and even more painful. And that sensation can often be perceived as the condition becoming worse from exercise, when in fact, it's a normal response to what the muscle and tendon tissue needs. Listen to this next part. When we feel more pain, what we do and what we believe from this exact point has a large impact on our overall recovery progress. Let me illustrate. Individual 1 might believe the tissue is damaged further and then further avoids the exercise. This person believes the pain is a reflection of the state of the tissues, and I'm going to link in the description why that's never the case. Pain is never about the state of the tissues, it's always about protection. A lot of the current pain science literature goes over that, and as a result, individual 1 might go back to the doctor and re-enter referral hell, more confused than before and frustrated that the exercise didn't work. Individual 2, this person understands that an increase in pain is normal since they have been sedentary for several years of their life, or at least in the past 4 to 6 months, they had not been exercising regularly. This person also recognizes with the low levels of physical activity and repeated stress from work or gaming led to their current level of physical health. And because of this, they remind themselves it's part of the process. And sure enough, after a few days of exercise, it seems a bit more easy and progress seems a bit more tangible. Person number 1 and person number 2 have completely different recovery timelines. Individual number 1 may not ever make progress until they work with a physical therapist directly who helps them understand this. And while these scenarios only cover the exercise component of the recovery program, it's also important to remember what you do on a daily basis can impact the muscular activity of your wrist and hand, which means more stress. Those are the two main things we can really control when it comes to managing our wrist pain. Again, it's how much stress our tissues can handle with exercise, our endurance, and 2, how much stress we apply on it with activity.
A snapping sensation is also common when you begin to perform exercises or after using your wrists and hands for an extended period of time, but it's often not something you need to worry about.
So let's get started. There are a few reasons why the snapping, cracking, and popping can occur. One is local swelling of the tendon sheath, which is the protective covering of our tendons. This is the most common, and I'll get to this soon, but I wanted to go over some of the other reasons as well. Number 2 is gas being released from the joints of the wrist and hand, and this typically occurs when you're bending your wrist or moving your wrist pretty quickly, which causes the gas to be released from that joint and cause that audible popping sound. This can lead to a temporary reduction in pain locally and is present in some cases, but it really is nothing to worry about, especially if you have no pain associated with the popping. Number 3 is more rare, but with increased stiffness of the tendons, they may roll over certain parts of the bone or rub against each other within the compartments. And in some cases, the tendon can partially dislocate, but again, it's quite rare, especially in repetitive strain injuries. And the underlying problem in most cases is still the same: poor overall capacity of the muscle and tendon. So let's get back to that most common reason, which is tendon swelling. We call this paratendon involvement or involvement of the sheath that surrounds the tendon. The purpose of this lining is to help the tendon slide smoothly as the muscle contracts. And when there's irritation and there's some swelling of the tendon, it can create some stickiness or adhesions between the layers here. And as they break, when there's some of that sliding, that cracking sound is being created. And so you really have nothing to worry about with this, but it is a sign that there could be some tendon irritation from poor endurance of muscle. And this is why with certain exercises, you can strengthen these tendons so they don't swell and lead to that cracking, clicking, and popping you might feel. Self-massage techniques can be helpful to provide some temporary relief for the muscles and tendons involved. And it's mainly a tool to reduce overall sensitivity, but also reduce some of the tightness of the muscles at rest. And this can sometimes allow more smooth movement within the sheath. You can use a tennis ball, your own arm, or even a massage gun if you have one. Spend time moving along the muscle and the tendons for around 30 seconds and repeat for a few sets. And now for the actual strengthening or endurance-based exercises. We typically recommend the use of a light dumbbell between 3 to 5% of your body weight. And most popping occurs at one of these 4 regions. So we'll go over the specific exercises you can do for each of those regions. We've put together a complete app on how you can build endurance based on where you're feeling discomfort and your level of conditioning. Grab it below if you want to start fixing your wrist pain today. Number 1 is palm side of the wrist. When you feel it on the palm side of the wrist, it typically involves the flexor tendons. And these are responsible for bending your wrist down and moving your fingers down to click the keys or mouse buttons. Using the dumbbell, you can perform wrist flexion exercises. For most RSI issues or pain with repetitive use, we want to focus on building up the endurance of our muscles and tendons' capacity to handle repeated stress. So that means being able to perform higher overall repetitions, starting around 12 reps and then building up to around 25 for 3 sets. The idea is that you use an exercise to target the muscle, but how you perform the exercise, high repetitions with a metronome, allows you to build endurance but also improve signaling between the brain and the muscle. The next region is the thumb side of the wrist. When you feel it on the thumb side of your wrist, it typically involves the radial deviators and the thumb muscles. And these are responsible for bending your thumb and bending your wrist towards your thumb. So moving your thumb up, away from the rest of your hand, as well as this motion of radial deviation. So using the dumbbell, you can perform wrist radial deviation exercises. Again, you're going to be performing higher overall repetitions starting at 12 reps, then trying to hit or target 25 reps for 3 sets. Next, we have ulnar deviation. When you feel it on the pinky side of your wrist, that typically involves the ulnar deviators. These are responsible for moving your wrist towards your pinky. There's an extensor and flexor-sided ulnar deviator. This is a really commonly irritated muscle in gamers and desk workers, mainly because of a lot of the mouse use flicking to the right or moving left and right very frequently, and the lower amount of endurance-based fibers at the ulnar deviators. So again, you can use a dumbbell to perform wrist radial ulnar deviation, along with other potential tools like a broom or umbrella. And lastly, we have the top side of the wrist. When you feel it on the top side of your wrist, it typically involves the extensors. And so these are responsible for bending your wrist up and your fingers up when your palm is facing down. And this is a really commonly irritated muscle also in gamers and desk workers because you have to lift off your finger from the mouse or lift off your fingers from the keyboard and when you're pressing a lot of keys. And again, you can use the dumbbell to perform endurance-based protocols for wrist extension. And as a bonus exercise to improve overall coordination, you can do something called a controlled articular rotation. This helps us improve our overall coordination and strengthens the wrist in all angles of motion and control, working on a majority of all of these muscles. This is absolutely a more difficult exercise. You can do it without weight and then progress to doing it with weight.
We've covered some of the most common questions with wrist and hand RSI. And if you have any other ones, feel free to comment below and I'll look to answer them either in a post or a video soon. Now, we'll close with 2 other common problems we've seen that can also lead to numbness and tingling in the hands that comes from the elbow or the shoulder.
Cubital tunnel syndrome happens when the ulnar nerve, also known as your funny bone, gets compressed or irritated as it passes through a narrow area at the elbow called the cubital tunnel. Imagine a garden hose with a kink in it. When nerves get compressed, it throws off their electrochemical gradient, which causes the weird nerve symptoms like pins and needles or burning pain, which, much like Diddy's existence, is remarkably unfunny. This nerve is responsible for the sensations in your pinky and ring fingers, as well as some of your hand's fine motor skills. So when it's compressed, you'll feel the nerve symptoms downstream in your fingers and hand. So how do you know if you have cubital tunnel syndrome? Well, here are the key signs. Numbness or tingling in your pinky and ring fingers, especially after long work or gaming sessions. Weak grip strength or trouble with finger coordination. Pain on the inside of your elbow. Symptoms that worsen when your elbow is bent or compressed for extended periods of time, like when you're typing or sleeping like a T-Rex. Now remember, nerve symptoms present downstream. So if you're feeling symptoms higher up, like near your shoulder or upper arm, it might not be cubital tunnel syndrome. Your nerve could be pinched somewhere else, like the thoracic outlet, for instance. Not everyone's anatomy is the same, and different abnormalities can lead to either subluxation or compression of the ulnar nerve, each affecting the nerve in unique ways. A subluxing ulnar nerve occurs when the nerve slides out of its normal groove in the elbow, often due to a structural issue like a shallow cubital tunnel or laxity in the soft tissues that hold the nerve in place. This instability can cause a snapping or a popping sensation when the elbow is bent. Some people are born with these anatomical features, making their nerves more prone to subluxation. Specific anatomical abnormalities that lead to subluxation include an underdeveloped or shallow ulnar groove, and variations in the ligaments that typically stabilize the nerve. These structural issues cause the nerve to move excessively, especially during repetitive elbow flexion and extension. On the other hand, nerve compression usually results from factors that create pressure on the nerve as it passes through the cubital tunnel. This can happen due to extra muscle bands like the rare epitrochlearis anconeus muscle, or from space-occupying lesions such as lipomas or ganglions. Inflammation from arthritis or joint deformities can also contribute to narrowing the tunnel and compressing the nerve. Diagnostic imaging like ultrasound or MRI help to differentiate between these conditions by revealing whether the nerve is being displaced or compressed, guiding appropriate treatment strategies. If you have a snapping ulnar nerve or nerve symptoms unrelated to overuse, it's definitely worth bringing up to your doctor for further investigation. Unrelated, but related, our professors told us a weird story in physical therapy school about some methed up rednecks they treated once for snapping ulnar nerve symptoms, and apparently they got wasted and bet each other that they could get the nerve to slide out of the tunnel with a butter knife. Whether that's true or not, or just another Florida man fairy tale, I don't know, but now you've heard it too. Barring any anatomical abnormalities or methed up misadventures, digital workers, gamers, and creators are particularly vulnerable to cubital tunnel syndrome from repetitive strain because of three major factors: weak and tight wrist flexors, excessive elbow flexion, and poor ergonomics. One of the most common issues among digital workers, gamers, and creators is low endurance of the wrist flexor muscles. These muscles, located on the underside of the forearm, are crucial for wrist bending and gripping. When their endurance is low, they fatigue out quickly, leading to tightness that can compress the ulnar nerve. This is the most common reason that we see cubital tunnel syndrome in this population. Think of your wrist flexors as having a health bar, and low endurance causes it to deplete rapidly, making the muscles prone to irritation and thus nerve compression. Prolonged elbow flexion is common during long gaming or typing sessions, and this places constant pressure on the ulnar nerve. And when you're repeatedly bending that elbow, it's narrowing the space around the nerve, which makes it vulnerable to compression. Resting your elbow on hard surfaces or armrests contributes to direct compression of the ulnar nerve. This external pressure further exacerbates the strain from muscle tightness and prolonged elbow flexion. It's like an external force draining your health bar, further irritating the nerve. Making sure the inside of your elbow isn't making contact with your armrest is critical. So now I'm sure you're asking yourself, what's the solution here? And I'm about to break down the top strategies for dealing with this annoying and painful issue. First up is endurance training for your wrist flexors. Things like light wrist curls, grip strengthening, nerve glides, and forearm stretches can relieve the muscle tension and improve the blood flow to that nerve. If you're looking to save time and get a specific plan custom tailored to your endurance level, click the link in the description for our wrist pain troubleshooter, which has specific plans for cubital tunnel syndrome. Our online tool tests your endurance and gives you a plan that you can progress with without flaring that nerve up. Up next is night splinting. Wearing an elbow splint at night keeps your arm straight while you sleep, and it gives the nerve time to recover. Many people see a huge difference in morning symptoms with this one simple change. Next up is taking breaks. Prolonged elbow flexion compresses that nerve, so standing up every 30 minutes to do some stretching or just straighten your elbow can make a huge difference. Last up is ergonomic modifications. Adjust your desk setup to keep your elbows bent less than 90 degrees, use padded rests, and avoid direct compression on the inside of your elbow can make a huge difference. If your symptoms don't improve with these strategies, or if you're experiencing persistent numbness, hand weakness, or muscle wasting, or even difficulty with fine motor tasks, it's time to see a healthcare provider for further testing. Bad wire management at your PC is an eyesore, but bad wire management in your shoulder will leave your arm sore. And unlike your rat's nest of cables under your desk, will actually hurt your performance. If you've ever felt that nagging, tingling in your hand during an intense gaming session, or maybe your arm feels unusually heavy after a long day at your desk, you might be experiencing thoracic outlet syndrome, the sneaky condition that affects up to 8% of the population and is especially common amongst gamers, desk workers, and artists. Let's dive into what's really going on and how you can fix it. Think of your thoracic outlet as a busy highway system where important nerves and blood vessels travel from your neck down into your arm. This highway has three major tunnels where traffic jams, or compression, can occur. The scalene triangle represents the first potential compression point. This space is formed by two neck muscles, the anterior and the middle scalenes, and your first rib, creating a tunnel where compression happens. When these muscles become tight from prolonged forward head posture, they can compress these important nerves and blood vessels that pass through. The costoclavicular space forms the second potential compression point. This area lies between your collarbone and the first rib, creating a tight corridor that neurovascular structures must navigate. Poor posture, especially with rounded shoulders, can narrow the space further and increase compression on these vital structures. The subcoracoid space represents the final checkpoint. This passage runs beneath your pectoralis minor muscle, which often becomes tight in gamers and desk workers due to prolonged internal rotation of the shoulders. When this muscle shortens, it can create a pressing force on the neurovascular bundle passing underneath it. Here's where your gaming or work setup comes into play. That forward head position you slip into during those intense sessions? That's caused by low endurance of your deep neck flexor muscles, which are responsible for keeping your neck in an upright posture. This causes your scalene muscles to work overtime to try to pick up the slack to keep your head up. The scalene muscles are primarily movement muscles and aren't designed to hold your neck upright all the time. And they can get tired and irritated, which causes them to tighten down as a protective response. And those rounded shoulders from hours of sitting? That's due to weak upper back muscles between your shoulder blades not being able to keep your upper back straight, due to low endurance, which causes your chest muscles, especially the pec minor, to get increasingly tight. If you have the double whammy of forward head and rounded shoulders, it's called upper cross syndrome. And it's the biggest predisposing factor for developing TOS in people that play or work in a seated position. Thoracic outlet comes in 3 major flavors, and much like ice cream, you can have just one kind, or a combination of all 3. Unlike ice cream, none of them are delicious. Neurogenic TOS is the most common form, accounting for 90 to 95% of all cases. Patients typically experience tingling sensations and pain that radiate down the arm, most commonly affecting the nerves that go to the pinky and ring fingers, but can affect any of the nerves in the arm, so your symptoms may be anywhere below the shoulder. This occurs when the brachial plexus, which is essentially your arm's nerve superhighway, becomes compressed at one or more of the thoracic outlet tunnels. Think of it like bad wire management. The nerves are the wires that connect your skin and your muscles to your brain, and vice versa. If those are pinched, you are going to start feeling weird sensations like numbness, tingling, and pain. The symptoms often worsen during gaming sessions or prolonged computer use. If the compression goes on for long enough, you can experience weakness in any of the muscle groups in the arm, which can also lead to overuse injuries. Venous TOS manifests through a visible change in your arm's appearance and sensation. The affected arm may become swollen and take on a bluish or purple tint due to compromised blood flow returning through that compressed vein in the thoracic outlet. You might experience a persistent feeling of heaviness in the arm as if you've just completed an intense workout. This form of TOS is particularly concerning for competitive gamers who maintain static arm positions for extended periods. Arterial TOS, while the least common, can be the most severe form. Your hand might feel unusually cold and appear pale due to a reduced blood flow through the compressed arteries. You may notice weakness during gaming or work sessions and experience cramping with continued activity. You can also experience numbness and tingling due to nerves losing their blood supply. These symptoms tend to be more pronounced during intense work or play sessions when blood flow demands to the hands are higher. While only a healthcare professional can provide a definitive diagnosis, there are several self-assessment techniques you can use to better understand your symptoms. Remember, these tests should never cause significant pain or discomfort. If they do, stop immediately and consult a healthcare provider. The first test is the elevated arm stress test, also known as the Hwu's test. It is particularly useful for identifying vascular compression. To do this test, raise both your arms up into a stick-up position with elbows bent at 90 degrees. Slowly open and close your fists for 3 minutes. Watch for these signs of vascular TOS. Significant fatigue or heaviness in your arms. Color changes in your hands, if they become pale or blue. Having to lower your arms before the 3 minutes are up. Numbness or tingling that develops during the test. The pectoralis minor muscle can often be a key player in TOS. Here's how to check if it's involved. Stand in a doorway with your arm positioned at shoulder height, elbow bent to 90 degrees. Place your forearm against the door frame. Step forward through the doorway while keeping your arm in position. If you experience tingling down your arm into your fingers, heaviness or fatigue in the arm, reproduction of your typical symptoms, this suggests pec minor involvement in your TOS symptoms. The scalene muscles in your neck can compress the thoracic outlet. Here's how to assess them. Sitting comfortably, put your hand on your shoulder by your collarbone you are testing. Gently tilt your head away from the symptomatic side. Add a small amount of rotation towards the same side as the tilt. Hold this position for 10 to 15 seconds. You might have scalene involvement if you experience tingling or numbness that travels down your arm, a feeling of heaviness or fatigue in the arm, recreation of any of your usual symptoms, and sometimes even slight dizziness or visual changes. This is rare, but it's possible due to arterial compression. Remember that these tests are not a definitive diagnostic tool. They're tools to help you better understand your symptoms. Multiple positive tests often provide more reliable information than a single test alone. Additionally, never force any position that causes pain. Stop immediately if you're experiencing severe symptoms, and use these tests as a guide for a discussion with healthcare professionals. Keep track of which of these tests reproduce your symptoms and how quickly they develop. If you're experiencing positive findings with any of these tests, it's worth consulting with a healthcare professional for a proper evaluation. At 1HP, we can help you interpret these findings and develop an appropriate strategy for treatment. The thoracic outlet at its core is an endurance problem, with tight muscle patterns forming as compensation for low endurance. There are three main strategies for addressing thoracic outlet syndrome: endurance training for the fatigued out postural support muscles, stretching for the tight overworked movement muscles cosplaying as postural support muscles, and nerve glides to free up the entrapped nerves. If the compression site is at the scalenes, these exercises are great for building the postural endurance of the deep neck flexors, which will offload the scalene muscles. Isometric chin tucks are a great place to start and can be done at your desk if you have a high back chair with a pillow. If you're looking for a more try-hard deep neck flexor exercise progression, check out our video on the iron neck, here. For compression at the pec minor, the costoclavicular or subcoracoid space patterns, building the endurance of the muscles of the upper back is critical. For shoulder blade strength, face pulls are a great exercise to start with. Stretching the tight muscles and trapping the neurovascular structures is the second strategy for treating TOS effectively. Remember, a stretch should never be painful, but it's pretty normal to feel some symptoms when doing this because you are stretching the muscles compressing those structures. The symptoms should not linger for more than a couple minutes after finishing the stretch though. If you're uncertain about this, it's important to consult with a physical therapist to get a good gauge on how much is too much, or you can flare the condition up. If the scalenes are tight, you can start with gently stretching them with the same way we tested them earlier. If the pec minor is tight, the doorway test we discussed earlier can also be done to stretch them out. Nerve glides can be done for any of the three major nerves that branch off of the brachial plexus and run down the arm, including the ulnar, median, and radial nerve. Which glides you'll want to do will generally vary based on where you're feeling the symptoms. These exercises should be approached gently, and like the stretches, it's normal to feel some symptoms, but they can also flare up your symptoms if done too aggressively. We typically recommend no more than 10 reps a day. An example of a level 1 nerve glide for all the relevant nerves can be found here. These are examples of all the relevant level 1 nerve glides for the median, ulnar, and radial nerves. Persistent numbness or tingling sensations that don't resolve with rest should prompt immediate medical attention. This constant neural irritation can indicate progressive nerve compression that may lead to permanent damage if left untreated. Significant weakness in your arm or hand, particularly if it affects your ability to perform precise mouse movements or keyboard actions, warrants a professional evaluation. This weakness could indicate severe nerve compression or vascular compromise. Changes in your hand's color or temperature that persist even after position changes are concerning signs that require medical assessment. These symptoms suggest significant vascular compromise that could lead to more serious complications if not addressed. Pain that consistently disrupts your sleep should never be ignored. Nighttime symptoms often indicate progression of the condition and may suggest the need for more aggressive intervention. Symptoms that don't improve with basic ergonomic changes and rest require professional evaluation to prevent potential chronic issues. Early intervention often leads to better outcomes and faster return to normal activities. Your gaming or work setup isn't just about performance. It's your first line of defense against thoracic outlet syndrome. Proper ergonomics can significantly reduce the risk of TOS by promoting optimal posture and reducing strain on muscles and nerves. Position your monitor so your eyes align with the top third of your screen, keeping your neck in a neutral position to prevent forward head posture. Ensure your keyboard allows for a relaxed elbow angle and a neutral wrist position, while your chair should be adjusted so your feet rest flat on the floor, with your thighs parallel to the ground. Place your mouse in front of your shoulder at the same height as your elbow to minimize shoulder strain. When using a controller on a couch, support your elbows and keep your wrists straight to avoid unnecessary tension by using a pillow for support. Custom-made gaming pillows like the Volari can be incredibly helpful. By focusing on these ergonomic principles of neutral, you create a space that supports your body and reduces the likelihood of developing TOS. We have a partnership with Volari, and if you're interested in grabbing a pillow from them, use code 1HP10 for a 10% discount. Think of your body like a race car. Even Formula 1 cars need pit stops. Set a timer for every 45 minutes and take a 5-minute pit stop to stand up and walk around, do some shoulder rolls, or do a quick stretch for your pecs and neck. You will be in a much better position to prevent thoracic outlet syndrome. When you're experiencing wrist pain or tingling, it's crucial to understand that not all hand symptoms are created equal. TOS can often be confused with other common conditions, but there are some key differences that can help you identify what's really going on. When dealing with neurovascular compression syndromes, it's really important to understand how these issues present. Typically, impingement syndromes present downstream from an entrapment site. This will help to differentiate between symptoms of these common issues. While both conditions can cause tingling and numbness, the pattern is distinctly different. Carpal tunnel syndrome typically affects your thumb, index, and middle fingers, like wearing half a glove. All symptoms are below the wrist. Any symptoms above the wrist could indicate TOS or another nerve entrapment higher in the arm. Additionally, carpal tunnel symptoms often worsen with wrist flexion or extension, while TOS symptoms typically worsen with arm elevation, looking up at your monitor, or sitting in a slouched position for long periods of time. Cubital tunnel syndrome, or compression of the ulnar nerve at the elbow, can mimic TOS because it can also affect the pinky and ring fingers. However, cubital tunnel symptoms are typically only seen in the hand, where thoracic outlet is more likely to be seen above the wrist. Cubital tunnel symptoms typically worsen when you bend your elbow for long periods of time, like when sleeping or talking on the phone, or apply compression to the inside of your elbow, like on a hard surface such as your desk. TOS symptoms, meanwhile, are more positional and often worse with shoulder and neck movements. Tendinopathy builds up over time from repetitive strain on specific muscles, and usually improves with endurance exercise. TOS develops from compressed nerves and blood vessels due to posture and positioning, and can sometimes worsen even with rest if you're in certain positions. Often addressing TOS can help resolve stubborn tendon problems that haven't responded to standard treatment. There's some key ways to help tell the difference. 1. Press on the painful area. If you can find a specific spot that reproduces all of your symptoms, it's more likely to be a tendon issue. 2. Notice when it hurts. Tendon pain is the worst right after or during an activity, while TOS can persist regardless of activity level. 3. Look for numbness. If you're experiencing numbness or tingling particular to specific fingers, that's more likely to be TOS or another nerve entrapment. 4. Check positions. If changing your arm position, like raising it overhead or slumping your shoulders, dramatically changes your symptoms, that suggests TOS. 5. Consider healing time. If your tendon problems aren't improving with standard care, you might need to check for an underlying TOS. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms and can't quite pin down the cause, it's best to seek professional evaluation. At 1HP, we specialize in distinguishing between these conditions and can perform specific tests to determine exactly what's causing your symptoms. This is crucial because the treatment approach differs significantly depending on the underlying cause.
When I first started 1HP 10 years ago, I had no idea how much of an impact some of these videos and content pieces that I've made would be helpful for you guys. And most of the time, it's a matter of having more of an understanding of what's going on with your injury from a holistic perspective so you can start to make progress.